Okay, everyone. So welcome to part 4 of our gut healing series for 2024. I'm going to start my slideshow here. If at any point you can't hear me, feel free to type in the chat or raise your hand or unmute and just say something happened. Make sure I'm plugged in. Kelly and I came up with the idea for this myth-busting edition of our gut healing talk because we had so many questions coming up when we were doing the first 3 in the series. And we thought, oh, well, let's cover that all in one. So I'm really glad you're here. Again, this is my favorite part because when I finished PA school, we had a little tiny bit of nutrition. We had 2 lectures out of, a year of 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. of being in class every day. And the 2 lectures on nutrition were terrible. They were very outdated. And for me, in undergrad, I had taken 3 nutrition classes in my biochem program, and those were actually much better. But I still knew the first 10 years I was practicing that I needed to go back to school and learn more about nutrition. And then most of what I'm presenting to you is evidence from the master's degree that I did at the University of Western States. So if you have any questions about that or about the sources, please let me know, because some of this stuff, you're going to hear a lot of myths or a lot of science that's been twisted or incorrectly interpreted if you listen to like your standard podcast. There are some really good podcasts and some good sources, though. One of my favorite books, as we get into some of this, is How to Not Die by Michael Pollan. If you haven't read that, it's a good one. But the goal with this talk is that we kind of summarize the best practices and what to ignore when it comes to, like, you have a friend that's vegan, or you have a friend that's 100% keto, and they're talking in your ear and telling you that you should join them because they feel great. Just keep in mind that they're a study of one, and that a lot of what I'm going to talk about today is generalized, really good, proven data about what happens when we eat really well for our bodies. And we'll talk about what that means. So the first thing to introduce to you is this concept of hormesis, which when I learned about this at the University of Western States, I was floored because it was something I'd been really suspicious of for a while. But number one, hormesis is all about the perpetuation of a defense, a homeostatic defense, beyond the period when it is actually needed. So what that means is that a tiny bit of a toxin can be a good thing because it keeps the body working correctly. Some of you may have heard of this theory with autoimmune diseases, that we have a lot more autoimmune diseases today because our bodies don't have as many infections to fight because of clean water and vaccines and all these things, right? So it's like your immune system gets really bored and now it's going to attack self because there's no parasites in the water for it to attack. So that's one kind of example of hormesis. The y-axis here is talking about response and then dosage. So over here would be like a very low level of a toxin. Down here, even lower exposure to a toxin. A really good example of this, I think, is stress. All of us need a little bit of stress, and that can be something good, right? Stress can be, I need to go get to the grandkids today. Stress can be, I need to go do my taxes today. Stress can be, I need to get up and go to work. But a lot of patients have told me since I started practicing medicine that they couldn't get out of bed on the days they had nothing to do or nothing planned, or they even planned a downtime day and they felt so tired on that day. And it's almost because their body didn't have any stressor for the cortisol to respond to. So the cortisol just flatlined, right? So I think that's a good way that we can relate to hormesis. The next slide gives you a little bit more information. For hormesis to work correctly, we need what's called a mild cellular stress response. So I'm not going to read this whole quote to you, but I did put a link to the study in the chat. And this blew my mind in school when I was learning about this, because I had always learned that things like mercury or phytochemicals, which we'll talk about in a minute, like tannins, and phytic acid, that they prevent us from absorbing the nutrients we need, right? But what I learned from the research that's been done is that it's very likely that we do need a tiny bit of specific anti-nutrients or toxins in order for the body to basically stay primed and ready to fight the next coming toxin. So it's almost like, if you will, your detox system, you want it to be working every day and you don't want it to go to sleep completely, because if that happens, then when the toxin comes in, your body doesn't really know how to clear it anymore. Don't get hung up on this if it's a little bit confusing, but the main point here is we thought we understood toxic exposure, and then we learned about hormesis and preventing cancer, and now we realized that what we used to think was true is not true. And that is generally what applies to everything in medicine. Something that we knew about the immune system 5 years ago, we learned today is completely not true. So the goal here is just keep learning and keep an open mind. And that's what some of the myth busting that I'm going to do is all about. And this quote basically just says that when you do consume plants, the phytochemicals, which we also sometimes include in anti-nutrients, they're called, they are not toxic and instead actually help our body stay primed or help our immune system stay primed. Colleen, I'm just going to turn off your video for this part just because it ends up blocking the slides. So, okay. The next part, this is a good example of stress and how stress causes a defensive response in a good way. And the higher the stress, the higher the response. Same thing with cold. If you guys have ever heard about cold therapy, what happens is, like, I have Raynaud's where the vessels actually are not constricting and opening like they should be. And it turns out cold therapy, you'd think it would make the Raynaud's worse, but it actually doesn't. It's actually like a little bit of cold therapy every single day for a year gets rid of the Raynaud's, because it's teaching the body to respond to the stressor correctly. And this is an example of exercise and fasting. Both exercise and fasting are stressors to the body, but they're things that we want to keep doing every single day because they're really, really healthy in the long run. Exercise is teaching our heart to handle stress. And fasting, same thing. And when I say fasting, I'm just talking about basics, right? 12 hours from dinner to breakfast is fasting. Okay, so don't get too caught up in overdoing it. That's kind of the key today. We're going to talk about everything in moderation. Okay, so these are some anti-nutrients that we consume in our foods. Phytic acid, the biggest thing I think about is raw almonds. A lot of people have raw almonds in their pantry. Lectins are in seeds, they're in gluten in wheat, also in dairy. Tannins are things like coffee and tea and grapes. It's like, if you've ever had a grape, you know, that kind of leaves a film on the roof of your mouth, that's the tannin. Protease inhibitors, a little bit different. Those are more in plant foods like vegetables, excuse me. And then calcium oxalate. This one is a little interesting because if you consume too many raw vegetables, you're very likely to get a kidney stone. And Josh can speak to this because Josh is one of those people that will take like giant handfuls of raw vegetables 3 or 4 times a day. And last March ended up in the ER with a kidney stone. And they said to him, you know, this type of stone you have, the oxalate stone, the calcium oxalate, was caused from eating too many raw vegetables like you were doing. You can cook them, soak them, boil them, or ferment them to get rid of the oxalates and lower the oxalates, and then you can consume the vegetable. So I want to point out something like spinach, some like oxalate, you can taste it when you eat raw spinach. You can feel that coating on the roof of your mouth. That's the oxalate. Cooking it means 90 seconds in the pan, tiny bit of water, tiny bit of olive oil, or actually be generous with the olive oil. But my point is you don't have to overcook it in order to lower the oxalates. And if you notice here, you know, some people consider sprouted almonds to still be raw. Some people consider soaking raw almonds to not be cooking them. So you don't have to cook the almonds or roast the almonds in order to eliminate the phytic acid or the phytates, but you do have to do something to the food. So I'm going to circle back to this concept of a raw food diet. Most of my patients, 95%, maybe even 97%, are not in a situation with their gut where 100% raw diet would be a healthy thing. It would actually be harmful to their gut and their hormones. And this is one of the reasons why, because the raw diet, if you don't soak or sprout or ferment anything, would include so many of these anti-nutrients, it would be too many anti-nutrients. Remember, with the hormesis, a little bit is good, but you don't want to consume a lot. Does that make sense? And we can circle back to that at the end if there's confusion. Is there a best diet? So first of all, I'm just going to say the majority of the research on anti-cancer, anti-heart attack, anti-stroke, and hormone balancing diets include diets where the patient ate enough omega-3s, which is more than you think. They ate more vegetables, 7 to 12 cups of vegetables a day, and more protein than the average American diet. So we know for sure that the best diet is likely higher in vegetables, higher in protein, and higher in omega-3s than what the standard American diet is. Now, are you eating, sorry, it's cold, I'm gonna put my sweater on. Are you eating the standard American diet? No, I know everybody on this call and I know you're not. Wonderful, great. But what happens is if you do the 7-day food log that we have, Kelly and I can add it up for you and we can eyeball it and just kind of help you with what do you need? Do you need more cooked and less raw? Do you need more protein? I mean, we do, believe it or not, also have patients that are eating too much protein or too much omega-3s and they actually need to back down, but that is pretty hard to do. Okay. We know that we should eat in a slow manner, in a relaxed atmosphere. Try not to talk about taxes while you're eating. Pay attention to the details. This Sunday, I'm getting a chance to do a cacao ceremony with my new moon circle, and we're going to sit with the cacao. And part of the tradition of a cacao ceremony is gratitude and mindfulness. And this goes, dinner tables all across the country. If everybody just paused and had some gratitude, it could be prayer, it could just be a thank you for the meal, Dad. Thanks for cooking. And then a little bit of mindfulness. What does it smell like? What does it taste like? What's the temperature? Before we dig in, I promise you that doesn't take that long. I mean, we're talking about something that you could spend 10 to 30 seconds before you eat, just noticing how it smells, what it tastes like. So it's not terribly painful. And I believe this is where people who do pause to pray before eating actually do have better digestion, and that's research-based. And then, I think it's really, really important to customize this because I have patients that come in on all these different diets, and I don't take anybody off of the current diet they're on the first few times we meet because we need to gather more data. Is this working for you? The chances are it's probably not working for them, or else they wouldn't be coming to see me, but that's a different conversation, right? So, but a lot of our patients come in really convinced that this one podcast they listen to from this biohacker, somebody who's not a clinician, who's a study of one and doing things to themselves, proves that this diet's the best. And unfortunately, that person running that podcast or getting that information out, they may be very different than the person sitting in front of me in terms of their hormones and their digestive fire, and also the time they are in their life and what they need. And I'm going to explain that more in a few slides. Okay. So in general, the motto that I would love for everyone, especially our children, to hear is eat food, real food, not too much, mostly vegetables. Okay. Now, there might be some things in this picture that you just don't enjoy, or there might be too many raw foods here for your stomach, or you might have done the helpful KBMO food intolerance testing, which told us that something like ginger actually wasn't good for you at this time. So you might see something in this picture that you can't tolerate or that makes you gassy. Don't worry about it. But the idea of this photo is to show you that there's a lot of different foods we can eat. They should all be colorful, not like Skittles, but colorful because they grow from the ground in this really bright color. And that is the healthiest way to eat. Now, I know that's not a lot of specifics that I gave you, but you need variety, not too much, mostly vegetables. I was talking to a patient the other day who said, I've never asked you this. I just assumed you were vegan. Are you vegan? And I said, no, but I eat a plant-based diet. And she said, how is that possible? How can you eat a plant-based diet and not be vegan? I said, well, about 80% of my plate is plants every time I eat. And she said, oh, that makes sense, right? Like I'm eating vegetables and fruit as the basis, and sometimes whole grains too, as the basis of the meals that I'm eating. Does that make sense to everybody? And then the next part of this saying or this motto is everything in moderation. And, this is an example of like a homemade bread. Maybe it's sourdough, or maybe it looks like more like a slow fermented bread. There is some fish here. I think that's supposed to be tuna, but everything in moderation. Even cauliflower, now having said that, because our vegetables have been grown in soil where the soil's been depleted of nutrients, we do need to consume more plants and more cauliflower today than we would have had to consume 40 years ago. That's 100% true. We've got to slow down and chew in order to digest that, but you still could overdo it. You guys know Kelly, she's not on the call right now, so I don't want to pick on her, but I had her do a food log for me recently, and I do one for her. So we check on each other. And I noticed that she was actually eating so much fiber, it was too much. Most of our patients are not having that issue though, but do the 7-day food log if you have any questions or concerns when we're done here today. And I can send that to you. It's in Charm and it's in the questionnaires. Okay, so this is where people get frustrated with me because they're like, you gave me some guidelines, but you didn't tell me what to eat. Just tell me what to eat. So we know that at every meal, most of us, because again, the food intolerance testing is helpful, the food log is helpful, need some fruits, some veggies, some whole grains, some extra virgin olive oil at every meal. At least 3 servings a week, we should have fish, seafood, nuts, and legumes. Be careful because a serving of nuts can be a tablespoon. So walnuts, a tablespoon of walnuts is like 3 walnuts. Be careful because the American version of this is half a cup, and that's not actually moderation, right? And then 1 serving a day of poultry, of low-fat dairy, of eggs. How many people do you know that eat chicken like 2 to 3 times a day? So that's probably not great for their immune system, which I'll circle back to in a minute. And then 1 serving per week of these things that we know are not necessarily the best. Now, the exception to this, I would say, is there are some people who are so nutrient depleted that something like chicken liver or beef liver or even red meat is something that their gut needs right now, but they are the exception to the rule. Certainly nobody needs like sweets and cookies and cupcakes more than once a week. The other thing I wanted to mention here is people often ask me why they can't lose weight. And here are the top things I see. And I think if you're having trouble losing weight, if you think through this list, it probably applies to you. Number 1 is, what's your blood sugar doing throughout the day? A lot of us, our blood sugar is going high at night when we should be sleeping, and we should be in like a calm, deep sleep. Thyroid, what are your thyroid hormones doing? Do you have enough? Sex hormones, do you have enough of your estrogen, testosterone, and progesterone? Do you have any chronic infections or toxin exposure like heavy metals or mold? What is your cortisol doing? Does it go high in the morning but not too high? And then does it go down in the afternoon and then to 0 at bed? And then again, what's your quality of sleep and your stress level? So if we can address blood sugar, thyroid hormones, sex hormones, chronic infections and toxins, cortisol, quality of sleep, and stress, people naturally will come to a baseline with their weight that is their healthy weight. I would always prefer that my patients that were born female, that they actually are on the higher end of the healthy BMI. So I do see a lot of patients that come in, especially women, and tell me they want to lose 3 to 5 pounds. And I say, that's great, but that's at the very, very bottom of our list, because 3 to 5 pounds could be water. And it doesn't bother me that you have maybe your BMI is maybe 23 or 22. I actually like that in terms of keeping your bones and your heart healthy. And if you look at the research, we know that women with a higher BMI, but within the healthy range, are always going to be healthier when they're older, as opposed to the kind of frail, like BMI is 18, but then it slips down to 16 as they get to their 70s and 80s. So keep that in mind, women, because I think sometimes we're hard on ourselves. Same thing applies to men, just to a lesser extent. And then the last thing I wanted to say about weight loss, I think, was just the water. Oh, and what are your detox pathways like? Sometimes we just need to do a little bit more with the hydration and opening up the drain of the bathtub, which is what Kelly and I are going to talk about extensively on April 19, which is a Friday, when we go through the happy food reset. It's for a happy liver. So join us that day if you have more questions about that. And then the last thing I want to say about weight loss is, are you getting all of your trace elements? People tend to be underweight or overweight if they're not getting enough of their trace elements. Micronutrients is another word for this. I'm going to show you a list later. Does your body think you are starving? Does that make sense? Because some of my patients that are like 300, 350 pounds, they are very undernourished. So even though they're holding on to weight, the quality of their food is very low nutrient density. So they're eating empty calories like white bread or French fries all the time. And what happens is your body thinks you're starving and it really shuts down. And now your metabolism is zero. So does that make sense? A lot of times obesity is actually an issue with not getting enough nutrition into the cells. And if we started as a whole community, the whole medicine community started to think of it that way, it would be amazing because people would be doing much better in this country. Okay, so the last thing I wanted to say here was just again, most of us need more cooked foods because we need a little bit more digestive fire in order to digest the raw foods. And that's the way that Ayurvedic medicine talks about digestion, is how much fire do you have? But it makes sense, right? We need 3 things to digest our foods. We need carbohydrate enzymes from the pancreas. We need hydrochloric acid or betaine from the stomach to digest protein. And then we also need bile from the gallbladder. And so digestive bitters and ox bile sometimes are really important to take with meals so that we can actually break down and digest our foods. For some reason, this week was the week that I had 3 patients in a row that needed hydrochloric acid because they all told me they're not hungry ever and they can't eat enough protein. And so that's a sign that you need more hydrochloric acid. And if you supplement with the hydrochloric acid, you can usually come off of it within a couple months because your body just needed a break and now you can start making it again, especially if we've addressed the stress or the infections that cause the hydrochloric acid to go low. A bunch of things that I've done and that I've recommended patients do that really work to increase your digestive fire. We already talked about slow down, chew. Consider an adjustment, craniosacral therapy or a chiropractor, vagus nerve work, gargling, yawning, making your eyes look all the way to the side, like Kelly's taught people, the side to side eye exercise. Go to the right until you yawn, go to the left until you yawn. Lower your stress if possible. Take ox bile or digestive bitters we already talked about. And then how about loose tea? I say loose tea because a lot of tea bags are contaminated with a spray, like an antifungal spray that they use. But loose peppermint tea or CCF, which I meant to grab from the kitchen, but we use cumin, coriander, and fennel tea to help with digestion. So just like loose spices in a basket, dandelion or peppermint are great. But the loose tea is great because if you find some that's organic and pesticide free, then you're skipping the tea bag, which really does have a lot of toxins. And then, a lot of people who are gym rats who love to exercise and they really need it for their mental health, they forget that really the saying is abs are made in the kitchen. So 95% of like what's going on with the middle of your body and if you're carrying any weight around your trunk and how strong you are has to do with what you're eating and not what you're lifting. And I know that my trainer patients don't like it when I say that sometimes, but it's true. You can't compensate. You can't really over exercise if your diet's really bad. You can compensate a little bit, right? But not necessarily, unless you're like a triathlon athlete. That's a different conversation, right? I know Erin's an expert on that, so I won't get into that too much. We all probably need to drink more water, but not necessarily everybody. I do sometimes see patients who are drinking reverse osmosis water and they are not getting enough potassium, magnesium, sodium, or lithium. So you might need to add some trace mineral drops to your water. It's that simple. You might need to have those retested to make sure they're coming up. We can do hair analysis for trace minerals and make sure those are coming up. Ideal weight loss, if you are overweight, like if your BMI is 30, is about 1.5 pounds per week. Had anyone in the area in Raleigh or Durham, have you heard on the radio, the man from Raleigh Weight Loss Clinic? I don't know if he's a doctor. I have to call him and find out. But he advertises you can lose 40 pounds a week at his clinic. It's so bad for you to drop weight that fast, because what happens is all the toxins are stored in the fat, and you dump a bunch of pesticides, plastics, heavy metals into the bloodstream way faster than your body and brain can clear them. So healthy weight loss takes time, and that's why the fad diets are myth. And that's why dropping weight really fast is a myth, because most people, they feel better temporarily that they've lost the weight, and then a couple months later they feel awful because they've just become really toxic. Okay, so is there a best diet for me and at this time? Those are the two questions I always ask myself when I'm trying to adjust what I'm eating. And that's what I learned from my professors at University of Western States. So number one, what is the time of life that I'm in? Am I getting to the point where I'm more perimenopausal? For men, there is also an andropause when the testosterone is going to be a little bit lower. What does that mean? Usually less sugar, less carbs. Your body can't process the carbs like it used to be able to. And then for women who still have a cycle, I'm going to talk about that in a minute, but really timing when you're fasting with your period is really, really important. Really important. I've seen people that had really great hormones, and after 2 years of over fasting, their hormones were awful, like no estrogen left, no progesterone left. So I'll talk about that in a minute. The most important thing that I find, at least for me and most of my patients, 99% of my patients, is what did your labs look like? Because if you had a NutriEval, which is a test we do from Genova, it's $400, it's not cheap, but it looks at all of your vitamins, all of your antioxidants, all of your amino acids. If those look great, then you know what you're eating is good for you. Sometimes your food's pretty good, but the amino acids all look really low simply because you've been depleted because of something like mold exposure or chronic Lyme disease. That's where we really need to address the underlying issue and at the same time supplement what you're missing. But consider getting that done if you have never done that, if you can afford it. The KBMO is my favorite food intolerance test. It tells us which foods you're reacting to. Zinc and omega check I do with LabCorp because it's pretty affordable and accurate. Vitamin A and E. I mean, historically for me, these are the things that are harder to get up. And some of that is because the vitamin A rich foods and the vitamin E rich foods are not the ones that are on my plate every day. So one thing to think about is, are you getting enough vitamin A? You can usually tell if your eyesight is going poor, if it's going downhill really quickly. Vitamin E is a little bit, I mean, it's in salmon. It's a little bit harder to get in foods, but you can definitely supplement with vitamin E if needed. So again, best diet for me at this time, or do I need a little bit of supplements? It depends on your labs. Liver enzymes, if your liver enzymes are going up, usually that tells me you need more protein, but it needs to be like high quality protein. Organic tofu is much better than conventional. Organic edamame. Kidney markers. So that's another thing that's very affordable. This is $2 with LabCorp. B vitamins, also very affordable with LabCorp. We can look at B12, we can look at folate, we can look at thiamine, and we can look at B6 with LabCorp. So not all of them, but I can get 4 of them reliably. And if your B12 is really low, it could be because you were vegan, you'd taken out meat and dairy for a while. B12 is also made by the good bacteria in the gut. So some people with very low B12, we put them on probiotics as well to help the gut. If your hormones are low, then that typically means you need more zinc and more B vitamins, and definitely to look at your cortisol. So it's all connected, and that's the interesting part of this. If your triglycerides are high, that's when you need a lower carb diet. Notice I haven't said anything about LDL or cholesterol yet, and that's because it's a secondary marker that should not be primarily used for adjusting your diet. We need cholesterol to make our hormones. So if we start to eat a very low fat diet, what happens is our hormones crash. A lot of times if your cholesterol is a little bit high, like LDL is high, but your estrogen's low, it's because you're not converting the hormone backbone into the estrogen. And that's where we've got to increase zinc. We've got to make sure you have enough vitamin D. We also need to look at B vitamins. Does that make sense? So the conventional wisdom about eat a low-fat diet to lower your cholesterol is completely wrong. But it is true, if you lower your glucose that you're taking in, or lower the sugars and the grains you're taking in, then it will lower your triglycerides. That part's true. Fasting glucose, A1C, so we can adjust with more different glycemic index of foods, more fiber. Most people that have elevated fasting glucose or fasting sugar and elevated A1C should take out eating carbs by themselves, and they should only have fruit or whole grains with a meal, and they should try to skip alcohol and white sugar, and certainly corn syrup and artificial sugars as well, which I talk about a little bit later too. And then lipids. So when I check cholesterol, I'm looking for, if the LDL is too low, that's a sign you're exposed to mold. If it's too high and your hormones are too low, it's a sign that you're not shunting and you need more zinc and you need more magnesium, and we need to look at cortisol and vitamin D. So I'm looking at the cholesterol, but in a very secondary way than to what the typical cardiologist is doing. There are some really great cardiologists, though, that look at the numbers just like I do, and they've trained me. And one of them is Mark Houston, Houston, and he has great videos, and I'm going to show you one. I'm going to put one in the chat about niacin. Don't forget that it is important to you that food tastes good, but you have to try something 10 times before you really have acquired a taste for it. So it's a strange thing to try a new food. I try to remind this to my, not just kids, but some of my adult patients that really were not served vegetables as kids or at any point in their life, right? But I think it's important that you enjoy your food. And then servings of each. When Kelly and I go through the Happy Food Reset, we actually have a handout we give everybody that's 2 pages to put on your kitchen sink. Sorry, that's the tiredness. Your refrigerator is where I want you to put the paper, and list the number of servings per category. So for your size and your activity level and your basal metabolic rate, how many servings of nuts, how many servings of omega-3s, how many servings of protein. So remember that the servings of each is very specific to you and what's your metabolic rate and how much exercise are you getting and how many calories does your brain use every day, because it turns out the brain burns a lot more calories than we used to think. And then rotation, everybody across the board, this research shows we should not be eating the same foods 2 days in a row, and dare I even say 3 days. So if you eat something on Monday, try not to eat it again until Thursday. Does that make sense? And that's just because the immune system gets really used to something, and that's when it starts to attack that food as an allergen. So for example, blueberries, I used to have blueberries every day, and then I did my KBMO testing. It was positive. I took blueberries out of my diet. I had raspberries, I had strawberries, I had mango. I rotated other things in the morning, and I got the blueberries back. My body stopped reacting, and now I have blueberries on Monday and Thursday. It sounds kind of boring, but to me, it's made things easier because I can freeze leftovers and pull them out when needed, as long as they're labeled and you can see what's in there. And it helps me because I feel so much better because I'm getting all the different vitamins that I need. We're definitely not designed, based on all the research that exists, to eat the same food every single day. And then intuitive eating is something that Blair, one of my friends from high school, Blair Silverman, has talked about. She did an awesome Zoom on this. So if you want to go through the YouTube channel, Blair Silverman is a registered dietitian, and she's also a yoga teacher, and she's in recovery from her eating disorder. And she's really good about explaining what is intuitive eating, how do you know what you're supposed to be eating. And let's just say that you just saw Kate in the office and she said, your blood sugar is high and all these things, and you got to avoid ice cream. But then you go out with your grandkids 2 weeks later and you're going to an ice cream shop with your grandkids. What do? Well, you have to listen to your body. I'm not there with you. There's no shame in this. It's all about experiencing life. Personally, I'm going to have a bite. Like, I'm going to ask for a smaller portion, but I'm not going to skip the ice cream that I have twice a year with my grandkids or something like that, right? So I want to point out that it's not all or nothing. That's actually not usually a happy way to live or healthy way to live when it comes to food. And if you want a little bit more info on what intuitive eating means for you, I suggest you watch the talk with Blair. It was really great. I had one last thing I wanted to add here, which is, this is the typical Western diet on the right. Short chain fatty acids are breakdowns from a lot of our food, but the short chain fatty acids are really good. They heal the lining of the gut. You can get this tested with our Genova or GI Map stool test. And that can be really helpful if you're feeling depleted, if you feel like you're bloated. So we can definitely test this. As you can see, there's a lot of things going wrong when it comes to the standard American diet. Every healthy person I know gets enough fiber and a variety of fiber. So not just one supplement every day. They eat enough protein for their current body weight and activity level, and it's organic protein. And they get between 0.7 and 1 gram of protein per kilogram of body weight. They eat enough omega-3 rich foods, and they have good digestive fiber. And they eat turmeric, resveratrol, garlic, and ginger almost daily. They don't consume sugar, alcohol, or caffeine in excess. I'm not saying never, but not in excess. It's really about individualizing. But those rules that I just gave you about like the healthiest people I know are also backed up in the research. And when I started this research for this talk, I put in into PubMed, I put in Mediterranean diet and efficacy, and I got back 10,000 research articles. So I don't think we can argue with 10,000 research articles that show efficacy of the Mediterranean diet. But again, you're going to customize it so it's perfect for you at this time of your life right now. So when you are talking to people who have a period, encourage them to read this book, Fast Like a Girl. Dr. Mindy is great. And Dr. Stacy Sims actually kind of trained Dr. Mindy, and Stacy was my teacher. So I got the teacher of the teacher. And Dr. Stacy is awesome. She's a PhD nutritionist, researcher, and she's a triathlete. And she wanted to figure out, Dr. Stacy in 1990 was determined in grad school to figure out, how can I be a triathlete, carry a pregnancy, breastfeed, and do all these things when there's no research on women and how we should fast and how we should eat with our cycle. And there was zero research studies on women fasting and triathletes in 1990. And so there's a lot more research now. This book summarizes most of it, but if you know anybody that's still cycling that wants to understand how to fast, they need to read this book. Last slide is just, first of all, reminder, I mentioned the 7-day food log a few times. It's a questionnaire in Charm. I can send it to you as soon as we hang up. If you haven't done it, feel free to do it, and Kelly and I will add up everything, and then we will meet with you and talk you through it. Most of us should increase our vegetable intake and try to decrease just a little bit non-nutrient dense carbs, things like pasta, white bread, very low fiber brown foods. Although knowing you guys on the call, I don't think that's the issue. But yeah, even Oreos, even if they're gluten-free, are a little bit of a non-nutrient dense food because it's just sugar, right? And then artificial sweeteners count here too. And then how many eggs do you think you can eat on a heart healthy diet? So the key is the research show it's based on genetics, what's going on with your lipoprotein, and it's about the fiber intake in your diet and the movement. So it actually isn't really how many eggs can you eat? It's what do you know about yourself? Do you know your lipoprotein levels? Do you know how much fiber you're getting? And do you know how much movement you're getting? Much, much, much more important. The egg myth has been busted. And then when is it not okay to eat eggs? There are certain patients when I get results back, when I say, okay, we're going to lay off the eggs for now. Also, if you have a food sensitivity to eggs or you have Epstein-Barr virus, we usually do take a break. And this is assuming that you're not morally opposed to eating eggs. Obviously, people's spiritual preferences come first, and we work with that. And then what about animal fat or saturated fats, dairy, pork, beef, butter, etc.? EIM is everything in moderation. So when it comes to saturated fats, in general, we want to get less than 20 grams a day. What does that mean? Do your 7-day food log if you're not sure, and I can add it up for you. Is cholesterol and hardening of the arteries all about fat? No, it is not. It's about blood sugar. It's about fiber. It's about movement. It's about the number one cause of atherosclerosis and hardening of the arteries is actually toxins in the heart. I also see a lot of people with candida, which is an infection in the gut. And if the candida is in the heart, it causes a lot of issues like a mitral valve prolapse. And then what are the impacts of sodium, sugar intake, and processed foods on cholesterol? So Kelly put these questions in there for me because she was just getting a lot of these. It depends on the patient. There are people who are low in sodium who actually need to take in more. Sugar, most of us need less. And then most of us need to skip the processed foods. But if you're skipping all the processed foods, that's when sometimes you need a little bit more sea salt. Potassium, increase your potassium, increase your magnesium as well. Last little side is just Dr. Mark Houston published an awesome article. Niacin doesn't work and is harmful, proclaim the headlines. This is just an opinion in Integrative Medicine Journal. He talks about why the people who make Lipitor and other statins have decided to smear campaign niacin. Niacin's a B vitamin. A common cause of deficiency is daily alcohol intake. Other causes include disorders of the digestive system, which all my patients have, and a long list of prescription drugs. Okay, so a lot of people need to take some niacin in order to lower their LDL and raise their HDL. And this has been proven over and over and over in actual really good journals. The problem is occasionally the media will get a hold of a study that was misinterpreted and twisted by the people who make Lipitor or Crestor. So be careful. I think you guys all know this and you're educated consumers, but be really smart about the information you're getting, where you're getting it from. You know, somebody who makes a pharmaceutical will also own another company. So you have to look at like who's sponsored the study, who's published the study. And then you have to dig sometimes to figure out where is there a conflict of interest. For me, when I know foods are helpful and healthy for your health, and I know that this B vitamin is really important to lower LDL, if a study comes out that just doesn't make sense, doesn't fit in with what I already know, then I know to go dig and figure out what's wrong with it. But that is a little bit of bias on my part. But that's also, again, because there's so much research on the Mediterranean diet being healthy. Now, here's where there is more research going on right now about alcohol, how much alcohol is safe to consume. And the latest research kind of leads more towards 1 to 2 drinks a week for women, which is much lower than we used to think. So again, everything is shifting. Some of the myths that I think are true now may be proven to be not true, or some of the myths that we're talking about that we busted, who knows, right? But this is, I think, the best information that I have today to present you. Keep an open mind, keep asking questions, and remember that food is so much more than nutrition, right? My kids can talk to you because my oldest has type 1 diabetes and my youngest has celiac. They can talk to you for days about protein content and glycemic index and fiber and all these things that other kids don't know yet. And yet they're also the first to say, Mom, sit down and have dinner with me. Because what happens at our dinner table is magical, right? It's like where we bond. They're 10 and almost 13. It's the one time all day when we come together and get to chat and laugh and talk. So try to avoid extremes and try to make sure that the dinner table is not super stressful. And that's all I got. I'm going to see what questions popped up without giving away names, and then I will end the recording. Should we lightly roast walnuts? Sure. And you can also buy walnuts that are already roasted. You can also soak them just like you would soak cashews before eating if you wanted to get rid of the anti-nutrients or just lower the anti-nutrients. Yeah, I think I stayed on one slide for a really long time. Okay. I'm going to end the recording and then you all can let me know if you have questions. April 19 is our happy food reset. I hope to see you there. What we're going to do on that Friday, me and Kelly are going to prep everybody so you see what's coming, and then you have the weekend to get ready, and we're going to do 10 days all together starting on Monday, which is the 22nd, and from the 22nd, let's see, to May 1st, we're going to eat all the colors of the rainbow. We're going to eat plenty of protein, plenty of vegetables, plenty of omega-3s. And I prefer to think of it that way as opposed to telling you what we're not going to eat. Because if you just try to eat more protein, more veggies, and more omega-3s, it's really hard to have enough room for all the other stuff, right? So